Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Tech Bites. Today, we're going to be talking about exploring the power of cyber resiliency, enhancing data protection with StorONE and Veeam. Today, I'm joined on the stream with Rick Vanover. How are you doing, Rick?
Hey, Kirsten, I am rocking. I am really happy to talk about this topic today. There's no such thing as too much ransomware resiliency, given that it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I'm ready to rock it.
That's awesome. And we're also joined by James from StorONE. How are you today, James?
Doing great. Ready to talk storage and mutability and whatever else we're going to talk about today.
So
Awesome.
James, why don't you introduce yourself? A StorONE. We just kind of rolled that off.
Sure.
What's your name? Where you from? All that stuff.
Yeah. So James Keating. I'm a solutions architect with StorONE. StorONE is a storage company that's out there. We're in the market for a while, but we're making waves around immutability and doing kind of what VMware did for servers a few years ago, where you had the ability to have like virtual machines and have a hardware stack or multiple hardware stacks, but you could have multiple virtual OSs running on it. We're doing that same concept for storage, so you can basically have that stack of hardware that you then have little mini arrays on that we call virtual storage containers, and that's one of the key things about that. Been a StorONE for 2 years now, and I live in the scenic northern Minnesota, so that's what about me.
Cool. So for some of our audience today, they might be familiar with StorONE, they might not be familiar with StorONE. So can you tell us a little bit more about who is StorONE, the integration with Veeam, and what you provide your customers when it comes to cyber resiliency?
Sure. So StorONE, we've been around now for about 10 years. Our founder, Gal Noor, he was an industry veteran. He actually had a different storage company called StorWise that he sold to IBM. And then that gave him the benefit of time and money to kind of look back and say, what was the storage market missing? What was wrong with storage that was out there? And so he spent 8 years rewriting the entire storage IO stack and creating StorONE. So what StorONE is, as I mentioned, this new software-defined storage. I don't really like to say software-defined because some people will think that means we're fronting in front of other storage. We're an array that runs on off-the-shelf enterprise-grade hardware. And as I mentioned, we can make those little virtual storage containers. So think of it as the ability to have multiple mini arrays running on your hardware. The advantage of that is I can separate out the workloads and I can mix use cases on the same set of hardware. And similar to the way VMware works, where every so many years, when you replace your hardware, you don't replace your VMware license necessarily. We're doing that same thing on the storage world, where I can replace the underlying hardware, but I don't have to change my software license. So think about other storage vendors. When you buy their next appliance, have to rebuy the OS as well. And we don't have that concept.
That's super intriguing, James. So rewriting the storage stack, that is right there like a super piece of innovation that was actually one of the things that really attracted me to what you guys at StorONE are doing. Kirsten and I had the privilege of interacting with you and a couple other different types of partners at y'all's. Can we say y'all's on the stream? There's you all, and then there's all y'all's, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, not up in northern Minnesota, but on the collective you all stream kickoff, we got to engage with each of you, and we really, I don't know, I've always kind of admired what you guys have done. But what's also really cool is I should note that StorONE has the Veeam Ready repository qualification as well, right? So they're alliance partner, they're doing some interesting stuff, but these extra secret sauce things, rewriting a storage stack, you don't just see that happening every day. But I think that it's important, James. There's really at the heart of it is just a basic data security strategy. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that they did, they looked at what was missing in the storage world. And one of the things they realized is hardware had made a lot of leaps and bounds over the last 10 years, 15 years. But the storage software, the storage OS or the IO stack had really kind of stayed the same and had been written at a time when hard drives were like the main type of media that was out there. they hadn't really optimized that the storage OSs for dealing with Flash, for example, or NVMe media, and that they had kind of, the security was like an afterthought. The way I kind of talk about it is security was added in later on. It's sort of like baking a cake and then adding the sugar later. So what we actually decided to do was create that whole new cake where we're going to bake in the security into the way that the product works. It becomes foundational. One of the ways I like to talk about how we do things, I always refer to when I think about how I'm doing data, because if you think about it, data is the most important piece of any company. I mean, they don't have IT to have IT. They have IT because they need to have that data. And the data is the important part for the company. So I like to think about it in the word safe. I need my data to be secure. I need it to be accessible when I want it to be accessible. And I also need it to be foundational. And that's the key thing. Because if you have to add a bunch of extra hoops to secure it or to protect it, what happens is you're opening up room for error, or for people to, while they're trying to do their job, cut corners. And when you cut corners, you know that leads to problems with security, right? So we want to have it built into the foundation. And the last one, it needs to be effective and efficient. So that means it has to meet a price point, because anybody could secure stuff for like, millions upon millions of dollars, or just not have stuff. But you have to make it where it's effective and everyone could use it. So that's what StorONE did, was kind of boil that all in with how we're doing the storage OS.
Yeah, so James, you mentioned Flash. Is it all Flash or hybrid or something else?
We can do it any and all. So the key thing with StorONE that makes us really unique is, and when I say this, storage administrators that are listening to this, they're going to audibly gasp, a lot of them. We don't have a write cache, right? And we've been trained to not have a write cache, because we've been trained that the only way to get performance out of a system is to have a write cache. Well, that was when media was the slowest piece in the puzzle. Flash, NVMe, those are all newer technologies that realistically, if you think about it, when you're interacting with a typical array, you're interacting with that write cache. You're not interacting with the actual media itself. So let's say I have a system where I start with a certain speed of drives, and then I want to switch to faster ones. A lot of the other manufacturers are going to tell you need to do a controller upgrade. The reason why they're doing that is they have to add more write cache. You're going to get more performance. We're feeding the drives at the speed of the drive. So I can have whatever drives I want in there. So you pick the performance based upon the drives you feed into it. So to answer your question, I can do all Flash. I can do hybrid, right? Have an upper tier of Flash and a lower tier of spinning. Or I can do what we call a two-tier architecture, where I might have NVMe at the top and then read optimized Flash as the bottom tier. So we have a lot of flexibility that we can actually do with StorONE.
Well, that's super powerful, James, because that does rock the foundation of what some storage admins might, conceive. No write cache, which to me, it just kind of closes the loop when you say rewrote the storage stack. Indeed, you rewrote the storage stack. From a resiliency perspective, so, this is an area I really enjoyed, some of the different capabilities. Can you walk us through the shield here on some of the interesting things that StorONE does?
Yeah, so we'll start with the upper one, the blue, the data retention, or millions of snapshots. So the first two things there is, if I don't have a write cache, that means I can take a snapshot very often, because I don't have a cache to clear. I don't have to have all that gymnastics happen to make sure all this stuff is on the disk. And so there's no I/O blocking when I actually take a snapshot. So when I take a snapshot, it's instantaneous. There's no I/O blocking when I'm doing it. So I can take millions of snapshots, and I can take them every minute if I want to. And I have customers right now that are taking snapshots every minute. The only overhead for the snapshots is your data change rate, so how much data you're keeping. And I've got customers that are doing something else that's, if I were to do this, the storage administrators will kind of have their heads blown here a little bit, is I can store snapshots for a very long time. I've got several customers who are storing snapshots for 7 years. So the way that we're able to do that is that hybrid that we talked about. Our snapshots can automatically age down to the lower tier, but I can still restore them into any tier that I want. So I can now cost effectively store points in time, similar to the way you would do tape, but I can get to them at the speed of disk. And our snapshots are always immutable. So they're electronically air gapped. And we have a concept called vSnap lock. What that really means is, once the snapshot's taken, I can't actually delete that even with administrator rights. The only way to actually get rid of that is I'd have to actually go through a process where I'd have to be on the name caller list. I'd have to have a code. I'd have to then talk to StorONE. They'd verify who I am with the code. Then we could get another code. And then using two-factor authentication, my admin rights, that code, that 110 code, and then and only then could I actually delete the snapshot. So we have it locked down. And another thing that is really unique is we have multi admin approval. So let's say it's similar like you're in a submarine and you want to launch the missiles, 2 keys have to turn to launch the missile. I can actually have it be where I have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how many admins I want would have to approve that particular action before it can happen. And I can lock that down to any action on the array itself. That kind of covered the top 2 on there. The anomaly detection, we automatically, whenever you take snapshots, we use machine learning. We use machine learning a lot. That's how we do our hybrid volumes as well. But we will watch the data rate change on there. And if we suddenly see changes on there, we not only will we alert you, we'll send you a link to the last known good snapshot before this happens so that you have an easy way to do it. As I mentioned, we have multi-factor authentication built in. And we also have an auditing log ability as well, where anything that happens on the array, we're going to keep track of not only who made the call, but how the array responded, and so we can log that to any kind of system that you want for doing like security intrusion detection, that kind of stuff like that as well.
Wow, that's some interesting stuff. So you mentioned that you have some customers that store snapshots for 7 years, and normally we know to remove snapshots after a period of time. So is it a way you store it differently, or how does that really work?
Yeah, so because we can do hybrid volume, so as we talked about before when you asked about having more than one tier, I can have a lot of times for customers who are doing this, they'll have a immutability requirement, and it'll be for a backup system. They may be running Veeam, or they may be running one of your competitors as the backup product, but they need to keep snapshots. You need to have some immutability strategy. So what we can do is we would actually create a schedule. So I'll give you an example. One of the customers I have, they have 2 arrays. On the primary array, they're taking a snapshot every minute that lasts for 15 minutes, and then they're replicating the data to a secondary array. On the secondary array, what they're doing is they're taking a snapshot every 4 hours that lasts for a day, every day that lasts for a week, every week that lasts for a month, every month that lasts for a year, and every year that lasts for 7 years. And then what we do is, because I can have that be a hybrid volume, as the data ages, it's going to move down to the cost-effective spinning media, for example, in their case. And so they have spinning media, but I can restore that snapshot into any tier that I want whenever I want to. And they've taken it one step further. And I think if you flip forward to the next slide that we have in this deck, I think that's the one with the picture of backups. Yeah, so they have this standby storage, the blue on here. So you have like 3 tiers here on this picture. They'd have this blue area. So what they actually did is, I mentioned they had 2 arrays. They had a primary array and a secondary array. On the primary array, they did it as a 2-controller system for HA, but to save money for the DR side, they made it be a single controller system. And we have the ability to have this similar hardware on any side. The money that they saved, they added an extra layer of flash on that system. So that way they can actually bring up 3 full snapshots if they were to get hit by ransomware, so that they can do forensics on it. So they have the ability to have forensics between 3 different points in time to look at it, because they're a state agency and they want to make sure if they get hit by ransomware that they've been cleaned. They can prove they've been cleaned, and they know when they got hit. So they're actually doing that, and they're one of the ones storing the data for 7 years. And so it would actually, in this picture here, the backups would actually route to the active backup area there, the green, and the snapshots would be happening there, and they would automatically age down to that retention tier. They're actually backing up the backup metadata as well. They're using a fiber channel LUN. This picture shows iSCSI. What they're doing there is then they take a snapshot as the consistency group across both of those. So they have not only the backup data, but the backup metadata is all protected and immutably stored for 7 years. And if they need to bring it back, they bring it into this clean standby storage area of flash, so they can actually run from that and have stuff restored very, very quickly. And so we have the ability to do all of that stuff. It's very interesting in the ability, because I can do all these different protocols, and I can do all these different things. And each one of those that I mentioned, so the primary backup, the backup metadata, and the standby storage, each one of those we would create a separate virtual storage container for. So think of it as like its own mini array. So I can dial in the performance at each one of those. And I can even dial in the overhead that I'm taking for protection from drive failures at that layer, not at the global layer. So in their case, they're protecting from 2 simultaneous drive losses on the active backup, the green in this picture. They're very concerned about their backup metadata, so they're actually protecting from 4 simultaneous drive losses in the red tier there. And so they can actually pick and choose the amount of overhead you want to spend for protection on each of the different virtual storage containers. So the key thing to take away is very flexible for how you can architect StorONE in your environment.
A lot to unpack there, James. That's really, really a good overview. And I like this picture too. So a couple questions come to my mind. One is if you think about Veeam, right? That's our audience here. They're going to be wanting to think about where can I put Veeam backups and, all the different data sources. I'll be like, why no Hyper-V? I think Hyper-V works. It just didn't make the cut for the picture. Okay. But what I want to highlight here is basically that's the repository that has the Veeam ready qualification. So my question to you, James, is how difficult is it to kind of, I don't know if this is even the right word, kind of re-promote or re-provision some of these safe, controlled snapshots to bring them back out for use? Is it difficult? Is it easier? I mean, do you have to get a lot of training to use this?
So very simple. Realistically, we have 3 ways to admin the system. You have a command line for guys who are, aging Unix guys like me. We have a REST API, and then we also have HTML5 GUI to actually restore a snapshot into whatever. It's going to be go to your calendar in the GUI, pick the snapshot you want, tell it what pool you want it to go to, and it'll make a new storage container from that snapshot. And the interesting thing with us is we're not tree-based on snapshots. So if I restore that snapshot, the original one doesn't go away. It's locked in time, immutable, doesn't leave. And all subsequent snapshots from it don't disappear. Like some other arrays, if I were to promote a snapshot, quote unquote, snapshot be production, I would lose subsequent snaps from that. I'm not that way. The snapshot is there until it expires. Basically, it's not going to go away.
Yeah, so there's another fundamental difference. That's where I used to call what I call a journaled file system, right? Where it just follow this nice line, this tree, right? The lineage of the tree. And so, yeah, that's very different. And then when I think about the use case for Veeam, basically it would re-promote these snapshots as additional repositories that I could, inventory scan, pull the data out, do a recovery, and potentially not even have to manipulate the primary repository, right? So the way I see this, it's almost, it takes some promotion through that calendar that you mentioned and then inventorying in Veeam, but it's almost like you have this incredible calendar view of your repositories, which then has the data you care about. So for Veeam backups, this is pretty interesting. Again, I really like what they do. So yeah, awesome stuff.
You wanted to automate stuff. The other thing that I love about us, I used to be an automation guy and did a lot of monitoring stuff in the past. Sometimes it's difficult. We have to go through and figure out what APIs will work or what the REST is and all that kind of stuff. Our HTML5 GUI has something called the sandbox mode. And if you go into sandbox mode, you can basically go through in the GUI, make changes. It's not actually going to change anything on your array, but it will give you not only the REST, it'll give you the REST or the command line that you would use to automate that. So we make it very easy for you to figure out how you'd want to do it. So if you just click through the GUI in the sandbox mode, it'll give you actually those stanzas of code that you would need to integrate into something to make calls from REST or to create command line type scripts with PowerShell or whatever you wanted to do that with.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Kirsten.
Sorry.
I think you and I are thinking the same thing, but go
ahead. So how do you manage capacity and storage efficiency overall? Is there compression or deduplication?
Yeah, so right now we don't do deduplication or compression at all. And we would we view it as there's a performance penalty for the array doing deduplication or compression. We'd actually prefer the application layer above us to do it. There's a couple reasons for that. One is security reasons. If you look at it, security with data have to be encrypted in flights, that messes up inline dedupe engines. So realistically, we're kind of future-proofing ourselves. The other thing is because I'm using off-the-shelf storage, and because which we didn't talk about this, but because I don't have a write cache, and the way that I'm actually using the drives, the way I feed the drives, I'm going to be going between 85 and 90% of whatever that drive is rated to do. That's the performance I'm going to get out of it. Most other arrays are getting around 35% of the performance of the drive. So I can do a lot more with fewer drives. So I don't necessarily need deduplication and compression. So my customers would turn it on inside the backup product, so inside Veeam or inside whatever, to do that. We wouldn't do it. And then we can manage the capacities based upon the drives that you have in the system. The other thing that we haven't talked about that is kind of unique with us is I can use very dense media. So backup guys, you guys will all get into this. We've been kind of trained not to use very dense spinning media, like a 20 terabyte spinning drive, because if you lose that drive, it might take weeks to do the drive rebuild. Because of the way we actually rewrote erasure coding for something we call V-Rate, we're actually using that to drive performance. So we can actually rebuild a 20 terabyte spinning drive in under 3 hours. If it's NVMe or flash, it's going to literally be seconds or minutes. So I'm already have what I call the on-ramps built into the thing for as drives get denser, I can use those drives. So I can do a lot more with fewer drives.
Wow. So that's super interesting. That rebuild time is mind-boggling. But Kirsten and I were asking because a lot of times we get the question, James, it's like, Veeam has built in dedupe and compression and other storage efficiencies too, which is nice, but people always want more. So I think it's a nice kind of balance here where, the source capture that Veeam does is doing a storage efficiency. And, to be fair, we don't have, if there's a pure play storage system that their number one feature is deduplication, they're going to have an overall better storage efficiency, but you're going to have different problems trying to get that data out, right? And so in the world we live in, I think about performance, I think about resiliency, mass egress for recoveries, that kind of stuff's more important, if you ask me. So let's talk a little bit more about how you can maximize the Veeam kind of capabilities here. So James, you prepared a list here. Talk to us about some of these key points.
Yeah, so we view ourselves as better together with pretty much a lot of different products, because if you think about it, security and those kind of things, protection, it's more things that you do, the better that it is. And it's not an and or type question, it's a with it. So I can run whatever you put on the system. I have multiple protocols, so I can be block, I can be NFS, SMB, I can be S3, all in the same system. And all of those various ones, I can take snapshots across all of those, and I can have snapshot consistency groups. And so we talked about, and all those snapshots are always immutable. I can architect the system since I'm going to be able to go at the speed of the drives. I can pick the drives I want to drive the performance that I need. So we're going to have that hybrid type setup where you might have really fast ingest and then have that tier for keeping a lot of data on it. And so that's the faster, more frequent backups, because I can architect it for doing that with getting more bang out of the storage that I have. We keep track of all of the change blocks. We actually do a lot of stuff with metadata. We could do an entire hour session with in the weeds on how V-Rate works, but that's one of the key things. And then the backup consolidation, that's the ability you can make a larger system. I can actually do a 12 petabyte system under a single set of controllers if I wanted to. So if you really wanted to do that, you could make a really large system that's not going to be really bad, take up all that space in your data center. And the fact that I have the ability to snapshot every minute. And that's something that I don't think people quite understand is, think of it as like monitoring when you're taking monitoring and sampling. If you're taking a snapshot every 4 hours, for example, a lot of stuff can happen in that 4 hours. And when you go to figure out what happened, if you only have 4 hour sample times, it becomes easier for the bad actors to hide stuff. If I have a minute between, that makes the picture a lot clearer. If I want to look at minute to minute to minute, you can figure out a lot of what happened. So think of it as almost like sampling times and the ability to actually do that without having a lot of extra cost. And then that, as I mentioned, that standby storage that we talked about that I want customers using, the ability to have that clean area for bringing this stuff up into. And it doesn't have to be just backup data. I can host any data. So I can run data from the system. I'm not just a backup appliance. I can be more than that. I can be a lot of different things depending on how I want to do it, how I want to set up the system.
So James, something's just come to me. And I know we're doing this live and I'm, supposed to be professional, But sometimes Kirsten's already got a snicker. She's like, oh, what's he doing now? So, James, I think you guys need some new stock imagery. Okay, so check this lady out, okay? But then I don't think that's her badge. I don't think that's Sarah. I don't think that
Beautiful.
is her. I think she's stolen somebody's badge. And then this guy, he's okay. He's looking all right. But is that him? I don't think so. There's a facial hair on this guy. I think we need some new stock imagery.
Point. That's a good point because, you got to have the ability to analyze the data. And so you have this particular data. Let's look at the snapshot before of what the presentation was like a week ago when it got sent before something happened to it, right? We could look at it and figure out where it got changed. Maybe something got in that line there because security is all that you make it, right? And that's really the key thing.
Yeah, maybe Kirsten can put this train back on the track. Anything come to you on this, Kirsten?
Well, yeah, you were talking about the changes, right? And what sometimes changes our data is ransomware attack, right? So what is like StorONE's strategy of protecting against ransomware? What are some things you tell your customers? And that some good advice that we can put on this stream today.
Yeah. So for me, the thing that I always say is like, you need to plan for, it's not planning to prevent the attack. It's planning for what you're going to do if you get attacked, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You're thinking you're not going to get, so you have to have a strategy that goes through the whole, how am I going to, when I get hit, what am I going to do? And does it make sense? And so if you look at this picture here, most other vendors, in my opinion, they focus on for ransomware. They're going to focus on the first two, the green and the orange. I'm going to protect my data, have the backups frequently happen, and I'm going to have some type of mutable copy, but they may not have a plan for what happens next. I mean, I don't know how many times when I was working at a medical device that people hadn't tested restores, right? And so, I implemented a plan where we would randomly every month actually randomly request a restore to see what would come back and what not come back, right? Because people do stuff and things change. And if it's not tracked, even with strict change control, things happen, right? So you need to have tests out there. And so that's where we've got those last two circles here, the blue and the red. We can protect the backup metadata. If you host that on StorONE, I don't care what data it is, I can actually take snapshots of that as well, have mutable, so I have that layer of protection. And I can host whatever data from StorONE itself. And so I can run data from it. So that way I can actually bring stuff up and run from it. So that one customer I was talking that keeps the data for 7 years, that has that sterile space. If they get hit by ransomware, they actually have a procedure that they test. They have a third-party company that they pay by the hour to come in and do the forensics. They're going to bring up 3 snapshot copies of it, have those guys dig through the data. They want it on fast media because obviously they're paying by the hour for the forensics, right? So they have to prove that they brought it up, but they could run from it pretty quickly as well if they had to, because they could run from StorONE on their DR site and not have to necessarily make it be just for the backup array, because we can do more than one use case. And so it could be backup arrays most of the time, but then it could be production array in an emergency, because the way that StorONE allows you to create those virtual storage containers, I can quickly become production array if I want to.
That's some good stuff.
Yeah. So James, one more question is, if you think about this model here, protect the production data, protecting the backup data, I've gravitated to this use case of Veeam only, but absolutely for production data sources too. All of these, points apply there. And a lot of times people need to realize that is super attractive. And is there any industry that, for production data that you guys do thrive really well in?
Well, we've got several customers that are doing multiple layering of it. So what I'm seeing right now is a lot of companies still have this idea, and I get it, makes sense. They don't want the backup data sitting on the same hardware stack as the production data. But I can do immutable snapshots and have 2 arrays on both, right? So I can do snapshots at that layer and snapshots at the backup data. So now I'm protecting the backup data and the primary data. So, and when I'm taking those snapshots, I have that anomaly detection. So I'm actually watching what's going on in there. So I've got multiple layers of protection, because realistically, you're kind of thinking of, this picture. The reason why I like this picture is if you were designing a storage array today that was designed in the era of ransomware, where it's not, used to be in backups, used to restore like a file here or a file there. It wasn't restoring entire landscapes. StorONE is made so that I can restore entire landscapes quickly, but I can also protect entire landscapes quickly as well. And not only just the production data or the backup data, I can do both, and I can change what I'm doing over time. I'll give you an example. One of my customers, they started out, they were only going to be using it for a backup array. It's all it was going to be used for, and they're never going to do anything else with it. Not more than 2 months after getting the array, they kind of realized the power of StorONE. They immediately added on to that array. They purchased a second array after time because they didn't want to mix backups in the same hardware stack. But they needed to do a new object-based thing for production data, but they didn't want to have that object S3 bucket in the cloud for security reasons. We were able to quickly provision a object bucket on their existing StorONE. They did a proof of concept with it, proved out that it would work, add another StorONE, off you go. So I can change use cases on the fly on StorONE, which is another really interesting feature of the StorONE that allows us to, I like to call it the on-ramps and off-ramps, because we've been trained in storage where storage is one thing, and then we have another array for something else and another array for something else. StorONE can do all of those things, and you decide how you want to use it, and you can change how you're using it at any time. And so your storage software doesn't have to change. How you're using it can change. And over time, that gives you a lot of abilities to meet the business needs. And really, that's the key thing. They don't want storage just for storage. They want storage to meet the business needs. And so flexibility really becomes an agility. So think of it as the agility of the cloud without the cloud price tag on-prem, and the ability to do all of that stuff.
Wow, that's really interesting stuff. It's been really good to learn more about StorONE, what you guys offer. And I think it's really interesting too, just, being able to take snapshots, detect the changes between snapshots. That's some good stuff. So if our audience wanted to learn a little bit more, how can they do this? Where can they find you guys?
At StorONE.com, go out there, or you can, we have lots of different webinars and stuff happening all the time. You can obviously send an email in to us from our website, and we'll be glad to meet with you and talk about it and go through more. Because realistically, almost everybody could use a StorONE. It's just figuring out that first use case, and then once you get the idea of how StorONE works, people kind of grow into it. Because we've been trained for 10 years, 15 years, that I have an array for backups, I have an array for object, I have an array for SMB, whatever. We think different. We've completely changed the way that having the ability to change your array to meet your needs, not have to have an array that's pre-designed for those needs, is a very unique feature of StorONE.
Yeah, so outstanding stuff. James, thank you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate the time. And as he said, you can go to StorONE.com with only one E.
Correct.
StorONE. And thank you, Kirsten, as always, co-hosting, wing person it with me here. Appreciate that, keeping me honest. And a big thank you to Jeffrey, our producer, as well as Felicia, our social media team, who operate this stuff. Couldn't do it without them. Up next week, we got some more industry insights. As always, rocking the good stuff. The Veeam 100 show is coming early in November. So much going on. All right, everyone, that concludes our stream. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.